I was returning home late at night when my headlights caught a figure standing on the side of the road. A man in a police uniform waved his hand as if trying to stop the car. I slowed down, even though something about him made me suspicious. His uniform looked a little sloppy and his hat was crooked. Regardless, I pulled over and rolled down the window. "Good evening," he said in a hoarse voice, with a kind of cold tone that made me shudder. "Can you show me your documents?" I felt my heart begin to pound. Why is he standing here in the middle of the night, far from the road? Something didn't add up, but I obeyed and took out my driver's license. "What happened, officer?" I asked, trying to sound calm. "Routine check," he answered shortly, not taking his eyes off my documents. His eyes were as empty as the cold lenses of a camera. "I need you to get out of the car." I hesitated, but the coldness in his voice made me feel that refusing would be dangerous. I opened the door and stepped out, trying to collect my thoughts. The man came closer and I felt his gaze penetrate right into my soul. He seemed too stressed, as if he expected something more than just a document check. His movements were nervous and his breathing heavy. "What are you doing here so late?" he asked, not taking his eyes off my eyes. A barely perceptible shade of threat appeared in his voice. I'm just coming home from work," I replied, trying not to show my fear. His hand suddenly reached for my pocket and I felt his cold fingers touch my wallet. He pulled it out in a swift motion as if it were his property. "Don't move," he whispered, then took a few steps back, never taking his eyes off me. The moment he started looking in my purse, something inside me clicked. I realized that this man was not a police officer. His uniform looked too new and his demeanor too crude. It was a fake officer, and I suddenly realized that I was in a very dangerous situation. I took a step back, trying to figure out what to do next. A feeling of panic gripped me, but I knew panicking was the worst thing I could do. My thoughts raced, looking for a way out of this trap. "Where have you gathered?" His voice filled with coldness again, and I realized that running away without a plan made no sense. I fell silent, hoping he would give me back my wallet and just walk away. But instead, he smiled, a smile that made my heart skip a beat. "We're not done," he added, approaching me again. I understood that he was up to something, and this something did not bode well for me. The situation was getting out of control, and I felt that I was losing the opportunity to save myself. I felt my heart pounding in my ears. It was necessary to urgently find a way out of this situation. Staying here is dangerous. Running away is even more dangerous. I remembered my phone in my jacket pocket, but any sudden movement could set this man off. "Did I do something wrong?" I asked, trying to buy time and understand his intentions. He thought for a moment, his eyes narrowed. "You think you're smarter than me?" he said, almost in a whisper. His hand reached for his belt, where the policeman's weapons are usually kept. I realized that he was trying to scare me even more. "No, I just want to know what's going on." I tried to stay calm, even though I was already panicking inside. "You don't have to ask questions," he replied, pressing a finger to my chest. "You must obey." This moment was decisive. I could see that his attention was a little off and decided to take a chance. I quickly reached into my jacket and grabbed my phone. Instantly, his face changed. It contorted with rage. "What are you doing?" he shouted, trying to snatch the phone from my hands. I moved back, trying to reach the road. I was ready to dial the number of the police when he lunged at me, knocking me off my feet. The phone fell out of my hand and I saw it shatter into pieces on the asphalt. "Do you think you will escape?" He no longer whispered, but shouted. His face was covered with blood from anger. I felt my head hit the ground, and for a moment darkness enveloped me. When I opened my eyes, he was already standing over my body, breathing heavily. He held my ID in one hand and clenched the other into a fist. My body was numb with pain, and I realized that I was losing control of the situation. "You should have just obeyed," he said with a hint of disappointment. "Now things will be much worse for you." His words cut through me like a cold blade. What did he mean? What will he do? I felt helpless, like a cornered animal, but I still had the will to survive. We both froze when we heard the sounds of an approaching car nearby. The headlights of the car caught our figures out of the darkness. The man hesitated for a moment. His face changed. He became like a beast, sensing danger. "If you say a word, I'll find you," he hissed, stepping back. His gaze was no longer as confident as before. The car stopped near us, and a man in civilian clothes got out. "Is everything okay?" he asked, directing his gaze at both of us. I felt my heart begin to pound even harder. This was my chance. I had to say something, but fear paralyzed me. The man in uniform looked at me, his gaze making me silent. "Yes, everything is fine." I heard my own voice, but I did not recognize myself. I lied because I was afraid of what might happen if I told the truth. The civilian eyed us both suspiciously, but decided not to interfere. He returned to his car and drove away, leaving me alone with the fake policeman. I could feel my soul screaming, but no words came out of my mouth. The uniformed man smirked, satisfied that he had broken me. "Now we will continue our conversation," he said, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "You have no choice." I realized that I had driven myself into a dead end. The only chance of salvation disappeared with the car disappearing into the distance. I didn't know what to do next. Each step could lead to even greater trouble. I was trapped, and getting out of it was now almost impossible. He moved closer, his hand reaching for my waist again. "Let's see what else you're hiding," he said with a terrible smile on his face. The sequel will unfold this story, plunging the hero into ever deeper and creepier situations, where fear and danger become his constant companions. I could feel a cold sweat running down my back as he began to search me. His movements were rough and impolite, but there was nothing I could do. All my strength was directed at not breaking down and doing something that would anger him even more. "Nothing interesting here," he muttered when he found nothing but a few bills and car keys, but I could see his frustration growing. He wanted more than just money. He wanted to break me, make me feel helpless. "Get in your car," he ordered, tossing back my wallet. His voice was full of disgust, as if I was just another obstacle to something bigger. I hesitated, but again I felt I had no choice. My hands were shaking as I opened the door and got into the driver's seat. He took a seat next to me, closing the door tightly. "Now go," he said, pointing to the road in front of us. His voice was cold and distant. I started to drive, trying to concentrate on the road, although my thoughts did not leave me alone. Where is he taking me? What does he want? I still couldn't believe I was in this situation. Everything seemed like a terrible dream from which I could not wake up. "Come back here," he suddenly ordered, pointing to a narrow road that led into the forest. My fear grew with each passing minute. This road was almost deserted, and I understood that no one would come to help if something went wrong. "What are you going to do?" I dared to ask, although my voice trembled with fear. "It doesn't concern you," he replied without looking at me. His eyes were straight ahead, and there was something in them that I couldn't read. We continued driving deep into the forest until the road narrowed to the point where it was impossible to go any further. He ordered me to stop the car. I felt my heart pounding wildly in my chest. "Get out," he said, opening the door to his side. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew I had to be careful. The forest was dark and silent. Only the moon shone through the thick leaves. I opened the door and stepped out, trying to keep my balance on my shaky legs. He went around the car and came close to me. His face was calm, but his eyes radiated cold determination. "Now let's go," he ordered, pointing to a path that led further into the forest. I obeyed, even though fear had completely taken hold of me. We walked in silence, only the sound of our footsteps breaking the night silence. I felt that this path would lead me to something terrible, but I was powerless to stop it. After a few minutes of silent marching, he suddenly stopped. We were standing in the middle of a forest where the trees seemed to be looking right into my soul. "Do you know what fear is?" he asked suddenly, and his voice cut through the silence like a blade. I felt his gaze penetrate me and my blood ran cold. "That's what I'm going to show you today," he added. "A fear you will never forget." He moved even closer to me, and I felt the cold wind pass over my skin. Something about his words filled me with panicked terror, and I realized that the game he was playing was just beginning. His words were like a stab. I wanted to run, scream, do something, but I was as if paralyzed. He was standing too close, and his face was hidden in the shadows of the trees. His true intentions were still a mystery, but I felt they were dark and terrifying. "You have no right to escape," he said quietly, but there was a palpable iron tone in his voice. "You're not here by accident. and you'll soon find out." I felt my heart sink at those words. What did he mean? I didn't want to know, but I had no choice. I could only go on, following him into the depths of this dark and scary forest. Further parts will reveal more and more details about the terrible intentions of the fake policeman, and the main character will be on the edge between life and death, trying to find a way to get out of this deadly trap. We continued walking until the forest became so thick that the branches of the trees caught on our clothes. Every step echoed in the silence, and I could feel the fear growing stronger. The further we went, the more I understood that we were sinking deeper and deeper into darkness, from which there might be no way out for me. Suddenly, he stopped. I almost collided with his back, so unexpected was this maneuver. He turned to me, his face contorted with a grimace of pleasure. "Do you think you can escape?" he asked, as if reading my thoughts. His voice sounded low and ominous, as if he were about to do something terrible. My heart jumped into my throat. I knew this was my last chance. Without thinking, I turned and rushed back in the direction we came from. The branches hit me in the face, but I didn't pay attention. The only thought that filled my head was to run. Run until I get out of this hell. I heard him run after me. His heavy steps were getting closer, and I understood that he was catching up with me. I tried to increase my speed, but fear and fatigue dragged me down. Each step was harder, and the forest seemed endless. The darkness engulfed me, and every sound of the forest only increased my panicked state. I didn't know if I could last long. Suddenly, something grabbed my leg and I fell to the ground. An alarm whistled in my head, but I didn't have time to react. The man was already nearby. "You won't run away," he wheezed, leaning on me. His hands gripped my shoulders tightly, pressing me to the ground. I tried to break free, but he was stronger. I thought it was the end. He held me like his life depended on it. His face was only a few centimeters away from mine, and all I could see in his eyes was a cold emptiness. "Do you really think you're smarter than me?" he hissed, clenching his fists. I felt even more panic come over me. The sense of hopelessness and horror was unbearable. "But I'll do it quickly," he added, a hint of pleasure in his voice. I couldn't understand what he meant, but I knew it was something terrible. I realized that I had to act immediately. Gathering all my strength, I sharply hit him with a knee in the stomach. He yelped in pain, and it took me a few seconds to snap out of his ecstasy. I pushed him away and ran again, but this time I didn't know where. I heard him rise to his feet and start chasing me again. My lungs were burning from lack of air, and my legs could barely move, but I could not stop, because I knew that then everything would be lost. Suddenly, I heard more footsteps. They were approaching from the other side, and I couldn't make out who it was. Another dangerous enemy? Or perhaps someone who came to the rescue? A silhouette emerged from the darkness, and I felt a new fear wash over me. But when he got closer, I saw that it was a woman. She looked excited and had a small flashlight in her hands. "What's going on here?" she asked, seeing the two of us. Her voice was full of anxiety and suspicion. My pursuer froze in place, and I realized that this woman was my only chance for salvation. I had to find a way to convince her to help me before he could take another step. The sequel unfolds even more tension, where the main character, balancing on the edge of life and death, tries to find a way to get out of this deadly game, which continues to drag him into its dark traps. The woman looked at us in disbelief, and I could see her hands shaking as she held the flashlight. My words barely left my mouth, but I tried to look as if I had nothing to hide. "This man, he's not a cop. He wants to do something bad to me," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Please help me." Her eyes widened in shock, and I could see fear filling her. She glanced quickly at my pursuer and then back at me. I prayed that she would believe me and be able to help. The pursuer did not waste time either. He looked aggressive, ready for new actions, his face covered cold anger. "What are you doing here?" he asked, coming closer. His voice was dark and threatening. The woman seemed confused. Her hands were still holding the flashlight, but now she looked wobbly. She took a step back, unsure of what to do. I could feel her confusion turning to fear, and that made me even more anxious. I don't know what to do," she finally said. "I need to call the police." "Don't do it," I shouted, realizing that this could make the situation worse. My stalker was getting closer, and I was afraid that she might be the next victim. "You will not be able to avoid responsibility," the man hissed, approaching us. You will still be responsible for your interference." I saw his hands go to his waist again and realized that he might be armed. I had to find a way to escape, or this woman would be in danger too. At that moment, the woman suddenly made a sudden movement and quickly walked back to her car. She dialed the number and apparently tried to contact the police. I prayed that it would not be fatal for her. As she disappeared into the darkness, I felt I had to act fast. My pursuer focused on me again, his face contorted with rage. "You're going to feel real scared if I catch you," he said, as if it were a cruel game. I could feel him trying to pull me into his trap again. I tried to gather all my strength to escape, but my legs were heavy and the fear was paralyzing. He was slowly getting closer, and I knew I had to act. I decided the only thing I could do was try to find any way to distract him until help arrived. Finding the last bit of strength in me, I decided to try another strategy. I turned away from him and started digging in the ground, as if looking for something. It was a risky maneuver, but I hoped he would try to check what I was doing, and that would give me time to escape. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice full of suspicion and irritation. I was silent, concentrating on the kick. I needed to buy time and hoped this trick would work. I heard his footsteps approaching and waited for the moment when he would turn his attention. Suddenly, I heard the sound of an engine. My heart pounded in my chest when I realized it was a car. It could be help or new danger, but I hoped for the best. I looked up and saw the light of the headlights breaking through the trees. My pursuer noticed this as well, and his face contorted with anger. He started moving to hide in the woods, but I couldn't tell if he was walking or hiding somewhere. The car stopped, and a man armed with a flashlight got out. He looked confused, but there was a determined look in his eyes. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice full of anxiety. I saw him look at me and then quickly look at the forest. He's not a cop! Help me!" I shouted, trying to contact him. The man quickly assessed the situation and took a few steps towards me. He was determined and seemed ready for any challenge. "Stay here! I'll try to find him," he said, pulling a walkie-talkie out of his pocket. I heard him call the police and ask for emergency help. I watched him head off into the woods, trying to find whoever was chasing me. My fear had turned to hope, but I still wasn't safe. The wait was terrible. I sat looking at the forest and listening to the sounds coming from the darkness. I tried not to think about the possibility that the man who came to my aid might just be part of my pursuer's plan. Suddenly, I heard the sounds of police approaching. My legs were weak, but I gathered all the strength to get up and go to them. I saw police cars drive down the road and stop not far from where I was sitting. The police quickly found me and started asking about the events. I was devastated but thankful that help came in time. They have already sent a team to find my stalker. "Well, deal with this," said one of the officers, his voice calm and confident. "You will have to testify, but first come with us." I got into the police car, feeling my fear and tension begin to recede, but I also knew that this was not the end. I needed to tell everything that happened to ensure my safety and the possibility of sending my stalker behind bars. Later, parts of the story continue to follow the development of events, including the police investigation, the consequences of the encounter with danger, and the revelation of what happened to the stalker. I sat in the police car trying to calm my heart. One of the officers, a young man with a friendly appearance, started a conversation with me. "Let's start with the main thing. Tell us what happened," he asked, turning off the notebook. I began to tell my story. First about how I was trapped, how a man pretending to be a policeman forced me into the woods, and how I tried to escape until a woman helped. The officer listened carefully, writing down the details. I tried to be as specific as possible, but every moment of my experience was replayed in my head. While I was speaking, the other policemen went into the woods to look for traces of my pursuer. I heard their voices over the walkie-talkie and tried to stay calm, even though every sound in the forest reminded me of danger. Several hours passed, but there was no news. I felt more and more anxious, for the thought that my persecutor was still at large haunted me. The policeman offered me to spend the night at the station so that I could rest and regroup. I agreed, but I felt like a prisoner in my own fear. My body was tired, but my mind refused to rest. The night was long and anxious. I couldn't sleep, constantly hearing different sounds at night. Every creak and every noise seemed insidious to me. In the morning, the officer with whom I spoke yesterday came to see me with news. "We found some tracks in the forest," he said, "but so far there is no evidence that our suspect is still out there. We will continue to search, but we need details to narrow down the area." I pointed out the details I remembered, hoping they would help find him. Every detail could be the key to the solution, and I tried to be as accurate as possible. The police arranged temporary housing and security for me while the investigation continued. I could feel the anxiety coming back even with all these safety precautions. My life was no longer the same, and I was afraid to go outside. At the same time, I received news about a woman who came to help. Her name was Linda, and she agreed to help the police in their investigation. Her testimony was valuable, and she also said that she saw many suspicious things at that time. The police continued to work on the case. I learned that they interviewed people in the surrounding areas and were looking at all possible options. One morning, an officer approached me and told me that they had found evidence to support my testimony. Documents were found indicating that the man who was arrested had a fake police rank. "We have established his true identity," the officer said. It was James Lawrence, a man with a criminal past. James Lawrence turned out to be quite a dangerous criminal who used his fictional role to manipulate people. Thanks to our efforts and testimony, he was apprehended and taken into custody. I was relieved to know that I no longer needed to be afraid. But even with the fact that the case was solved, the memories of those night events remained with me. I continued to work on my recovery and return to a normal life. Although the fear and anxiety remained, I tried to find peace in my daily life. Linda also became a part of my life as friends, and I was grateful for her help. I no longer considered the forest a safe place, but it was part of my new life, and I learned to appreciate every day I spent in safety. After some time, I decided to return to work and resume a normal life. The police made arrangements for my safety, and I tried not to think about those terrible events, although they did not leave my thoughts entirely. Getting back to normal wasn't easy, but I found new meaning in each day. I learned to appreciate life and the people around me and tried to leave my fears behind. I continued to live my life trying to find a new balance and peace. Although the events of that night left their mark on my memory, I learned to cope with them and find the strength for new beginnings. My experience was difficult, but it also gave me the opportunity to appreciate the true value of life and relationships. I was grateful for the help I received and the opportunity to start a new life, no longer in danger. Several months have passed since James Lawrence was arrested. I tried to get used to my new life, but disturbing memories still visited me from time to time. Every noise in the night, every small, unfamiliar sound reminded me of that terrible night. My work was going well, but sometimes I felt like I was haunted by fear. I started seeing a therapist to deal with my anxiety and regain my inner peace. These sessions helped, but did not give complete peace. One day I received a letter in my mailbox. The letter was without a return address and had only my name. When I opened the envelope, I found a threatening message inside. It said that even after the arrest of James Lawrence, someone still wanted revenge. My fears returned. I immediately called the police, and they started a new investigation to find out who could have sent the message. The threats continued to come in the following weeks. The letters became increasingly aggressive and personal. I felt that my life was in danger again. The police assured me that they were taking all necessary measures, but that did nothing to calm my fear. I kept thinking that someone could be behind these threats. Was it an accomplice of James Lawrence, or just someone who decided to take advantage of the situation? One evening, I was coming home from work when I noticed that the footprints on the ground near my driveway looked suspicious. He immediately felt the danger and decided not to enter the apartment, but called the police. They arrived quite quickly and inspected the area. It turned out that there was nothing dangerous, but my fear remained. I began to doubt whether I would ever feel safe. Trials and stress gave me a new perspective on life. My therapist helped me find ways to deal with my anxiety. We worked on relaxation and confidence techniques. I started practicing meditation and regular exercise. These techniques have helped me regain control of my life and find peace, even in the most anxious moments. I learned to distinguish real danger from obsessive fears. After an investigation, the police found that the threats came from fake addresses and did not pose a real threat. It gave me some peace, but I still couldn't forget the fear they gave me. I tried to get back to normal life and find joy in everyday things again. It was a long road to recovery, but I was determined not to let fear rule my life. Over time, I began to appreciate the moments of peace and joy in life more. I went back to my regular job and started spending more time with friends and family. I've learned that life can be unpredictable and dangerous, but that doesn't mean I have to live in fear all the time. My friendship with Linda strengthened, and I thanked her for her support. We became good friends and spent time together trying to distract ourselves from difficult memories. A few years passed, and I was able to find peace in my life. The threats and fears disappeared, and I began to enjoy life again. I learned to live in the moment and appreciate what I have. The police continued to follow the case of James Lawrence and other suspects, but I knew that their work helped me feel safe. I continued to monitor news and developments, but I was no longer on constant alert. I started planning my future with a new approach to life. I took on new projects and hobbies that I always wanted to try. My fears and anxieties became a part of my past, and I learned to let go of things I couldn't control. My experience has taught me that life can be difficult, but it is important to find the strength and courage to move forward. I felt grateful for each new day and new opportunity. My story was difficult, but it taught me to appreciate life and find joy even in the most difficult circumstances. Although those nights when I was threatened will remain in my memory, I have learned to move on and find peace. I hope my story will help others understand that even in the darkest moments, there is always a way to light. I am proud that I was able to overcome my fears and find a new meaning in life. Although my life was gradually returning to normal, I still felt the effects of what I experienced in my dreams. Every night I woke up in a cold sweat, filled with fear from the memories of what had happened. The dreams were so real that I felt threatened again. My therapist advised me to keep a dream journal. I started writing down everything I remembered after waking up. It helped me better understand my fears and identify the triggers that caused them. My friends and family noticed that I became more withdrawn. I tried to explain to them that I was going through a difficult period, but it was difficult for them to understand how difficult it was for me to cope with those experiences. Linda remained my main support. She called regularly and came to be there. Her presence gave me a sense of peace that I couldn't find on my own. I decided to take part in a study that helped people who had experienced similar situations. It was part of the therapeutic process, and I hoped it would help me better understand and cope with my own experience. As part of the research, I had the opportunity to communicate with other people who have experienced similar injuries. Their stories were different, but we all shared the same experience of dealing with PTSD. Over time, I noticed that by helping others, I began to feel relief myself. Talking to people who understood my experiences gave me a new perspective. I learned that my story can be helpful to others and that I can use my experience to help others. I started participating in support groups and speaking at seminars where I shared my experiences. It became part of my therapeutic process and gave me new meaning in life. Constant communication with people who have also experienced trauma has helped me to reestablish old connections. I started reconnecting with friends I hadn't seen for a long time and gradually returned to a normal social life. I learned to talk about my experiences openly and honestly, not to be afraid of judgments. It helped me make new friends and strengthen old relationships.